You're listening to The Voice of Russia from London. I'm Simon Parker. Today our studio discussion is about men and their body image. Until recently, it's fair to say only a minority of men worried too much about the shape of their body, and bodybuilding was a minority activity. But a surge in popularity of men's magazines and high levels of media focus on many male celebrities and their physiques seems to be changing that. Men's Health magazine is Britain's best-selling title for men. It always features a perfectly toned male model on the cover with well-defined, lean abdominal muscles. Dietary supplements and muscle-building protein drinks are selling in bigger numbers, and it seems that even young teenage boys are now starting to think about their physique, sometimes dieting and exercising excessively to achieve the perfect body. But is this obsession with muscles and how we look healthy? In the studio, I'm joined by Rob Kemp, a journalist who writes for Men's Health and other men's lifestyle publications. Jim McVeigh, who is the acting director at the Centre for Public Health at Liverpool John Moores University. And on the line, we're joined by Ben Carpenter. Ben is a fitness model and personal trainer. Jim, I'll start with you. Jim McVeigh, you work at the Centre for Public Health at Liverpool John Moores University. In your role there, have you seen a sharp rise in men trying to attain the so-called perfect physique?
Yes, for the past 20 years we've been monitoring the use of anabolic steroids. What we saw in the early 90s was, as you described, quite a small number of people who were either competitive bodybuilders or in the security industry. Now we're seeing many times that many, and most of those are young males who are using substances to attain a body image, to sculpt their body, to increase muscle mass and definition, not necessarily with a goal, and partly for their own self-esteem or for interaction within their peer group.
Ben Carpenter, you work as a fitness model and also a personal trainer, so you get to see this world from both sides. You help people achieve their fitness goals. You also model and you also have your picture taken because you do have one of these perfect physiques. What change have you seen among men in the bodybuilding area, and what expectations do your clients often have?
I think one of the issues with having, say, males that, like you say, are in a perfect physique is people are often aspiring to photos that they see in magazines which do have the benefit of editing, as well as kind of physique manipulations which are only temporary. So people who, like myself, who will be in photo shoot condition, will look that way for a period of, say, 24 hours only. So when people are seeing photos of us in magazines, how we look on a day-to-day basis is not reflected within that photo. We obviously don't have editing and the ability to touch up skin and make a physique look even better. So I think that to a point, people are aspiring to a physique which is almost above what is actually attainable naturally because of these kind of editing processes and procedures.
Rob Kemp, you write for Men's Health magazine. What's your reaction to what Ben said? What sort of role are Men's Health and other magazines playing in coming up with this concept of what perfect physique is?
I understand where Ben's coming from. It's not the first time I've heard that argument, and I, to an extent, I think as with women's magazines for many years, the men's magazines almost taken a leaf out of their book. That cover model image is it's a show home. It's the aspirational idea. This is, in an ideal world, how you'll look. The majority of the readers of the magazine, which I first joined there in the mid-90s when we were looking at the lad mags selling 500,000 issues a month, and Men's Health was a fairly small fry magazine back then. The lad mags have died a death, and Men's Health is leading the way now. And the reason is because many men are following that ideal. They're looking at that image, and admittedly, I can understand with the work that Jim's doing there are concerns about some extremes and use of steroids and that kind of thing. But if you look on the high street these days, the fitness industry is huge. It's huge. There's pubs are closing every week and gyms are opening every week. Okay, we've got everyone from Virgin Active to LA Fitness and various franchises out there. The majority of men who are aspiring to that cover model image are going to the gym, are looking after their diet, are easing off the pints, are cutting out the takeaways, are cycling, running, walking. The bulk of them who are following that Men's Health ideal are healthy men.
It's that point, actually, which I think is particularly interesting, and I'd like to put this to Ben. In your work in gyms, Do you think we have entered a more health-conscious era? Are you seeing more people going to gyms and more people wanting to get fit in comparison to perhaps more of a lad culture which existed in the 90s, the kind of the cigarettes and alcohol generation of Oasis and Blur, that sort of thing?
Possibly, although I don't think that describing it as a health culture is always the most appropriate term. I think people are more obsessed with vanity itself, often almost at the expense of health. So a lot of people that I speak to on a day-to-day basis, the way they look is the highest priority. What they'll do to get there doesn't always go hand in hand with health. People that are going on, crash diets or like Jim said, anabolic steroid use, etc., is becoming more and more common in my experience.
Jim, you work with people who are dealing with the consequences of perhaps overdoing it in trying to find and attain the perfect physique. Do you find that there is sometimes a very vast difference between what looks healthy and what is actually healthy? Is there a different thing going on the outside of people's bodies than there is on the inside?
Yes, I think it's important to differentiate fitness and, in many cases, extreme bodybuilding and body sculpture. Certainly for those people who are using anabolic steroids, growth hormone, a whole raft of other drugs, it's not about fitness. It's about appearance, and it's not even about appearance for how they look to the rest of the population, the 99% of people out there. It's how they look to themselves and how they look to within what is often quite a tight community of people who are doing the same things. It has been a very small minority of people, but all the indications are that this is rising. A recent study looking at all the statistics globally came out with an estimate of 3% of the world population have used anabolic steroids. These are vast numbers. For most of those, they will have used for a short time and maybe stopped using, but for some people, that use will continue, and they are facing serious health consequences.
Ben, how do you react to what Jim McVeigh's just said there? You work in an environment in which you're surrounded by many men who are trying to attain results, big gains. Would you say that there is a use of anabolic steroids which is going on underneath the counter?
I think you made a really good point that the physique that people are aspiring to is something that is within themselves, not to the rest of the community. There are a lot of bodybuilders out there who want to look a certain way, knowing that to the mass majority of the population, they will get viewed as something which has gone above and beyond what looks good. So to them, at the very, very extreme end of the spectrum, this is what they're trying to achieve, but knowing that most people will actually hate the way that they look. So it is very, I think people kind of, they do it for the image of themselves, their own kind of body dysmorphia, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're conforming to what society would think a good-looking physique is. So there is a very, very extreme end of the spectrum within that.
Rob, in your time working for Men's Health, there must be editorial meetings, there must be discussions about who your audience is, who are you trying to create articles for and diet plans and things like that. What goes on behind the scenes at men's publications in terms of your audience? Who are you trying to attract to buy your magazine and buy into this lifestyle, this culture?
Predominantly it's young males. It's the guys that you see on the cover are, in an ideal world, a mirror image of the target market. The majority of guys who buy the magazine will be at a point in their life where they've, so many of them in our fat burners section in particular, would be guys who have gone through the university, got into the student life, maybe put on a few pounds, not necessarily happy with the way they look. Certainly, as touching on slightly what I've just been talking about, but in this kind of selfie culture that we have these days, there's so much pressure, as it were, on how you look among your peers. So there'll be guys who are picking up the magazine who are doing, with that in mind, with the way they look in mind, looking to get tips and advice on how to become the guy on the cover. And equally, we've run competitions through the years where we've put guys who read the magazine on the cover. We've done auditions around the country, so we kind of get to meet readers there and then, and that's quite an interesting thing, because you get a broad spectrum. You get the kind of guys that Jim and Ben are speaking about, who are obsessed with their looks to the point where it's almost dangerous, through to guys in their 40s, 50s, even beyond sometimes, who just want to change their lifestyle, who are looking at that magazine and thinking that's what I want to be. I want to get somewhere towards those cover lines. I want to be able to live the life that portrays.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia from London. I'm Simon Parker, and today our studio discussion is about men and their body image. In the studio, I'm joined by Rob Kemp, a journalist who writes for Men's Health magazine and other men's lifestyle publications. Jim McVeigh, who is the acting director at the Centre for Public Health at Liverpool John Moores University. And on the line, we're joined by Ben Carpenter. Ben is a fitness model and personal trainer. Jim McVeigh, you work at the Centre for Public Health at Liverpool John Moores University. Do we live in an era of increased vanity amongst all of us, or just men or women? How does it work?
I think as what we've heard, men are now being exposed to many of the pressures that women have done for generations, and they're not well adapted to it in many cases. I think it's also important to think it's not just about individuals taking massive amounts of anabolic steroids and obtaining huge muscles. For many people, it's about fat stripping. It's about getting that definition. It's the same things that women have for many years looked for, that sort of silver bullet of losing weight. I think it's part of a much wider phenomenon of moving from a society of looking to cure things, of a pill for every ill, to better than well, to not just fulfilling your potential, but going beyond that, or rolling back the clock to a situation where you had higher levels of hormones, where you were able to strip fat, where you were able to behave in a way that for a middle-aged man just makes you fat, but by taking a silver bullet you can remain trim. And I think it covers many different sections of our lifestyles in our world today.
I'd be very interested to hear from all of you, regardless of your background and your academic backgrounds and your careers, just merely as men, in terms of, does this boil down to a very primal desire for a lot of men to be athletic and virile? Ben, what do you make of that?
I think, to be honest, I've witnessed this firsthand with myself. Originally, when I started as a personal trainer, believe it or not, I wasn't actually that vain, and it was almost like as I was in the public eye, more and more people expected me to look a certain way. My own expectations of myself rose and rose and rose and rose, to the point that my own expectation of how I should look, when being in a comparison with other fitness models, other personal trainers, etc., that increased significantly kind of year upon year, to the point that it is pushing the boundaries in terms of health, like maintaining an unnaturally low body fat, or trying to look as good as possible all the time, which does come at the detriment of health in some instances. So I think in terms of people trying to look good, I do agree with what's been said, that men are almost starting to emulate what females have experienced in previous years, with increased pressure for them to look a certain way.
Rob Kemp, when I look at the Men's Health website, for example, and other men's websites having many similar things on there seems to be a link. For example, looking at the Men's Health website, there is sections about muscle gains, fitness programs, diet plans, and then there's a section brazenly called sex. And there seems to be this link going on between the perfect physique and how attractive you may be to those you're trying to attract.
Yes, yeah, that touches on, as you said at the start, some possibly kind of almost primeval instincts among males, the idea of the alpha male. The more virile, the better looking you are, the more chance you have to procreate. I think that I agree completely that it taps in on that. Touching also on as Ben was just saying, that the pressures on males are, it's almost we're taking a leaf again out of women's books, but for years, whether it's in the job market or in the dating game, or at a time of life during change like divorce and that, there was pressures on women to look good, to look younger. If you want to get ahead in the world of work, there's constantly the emphasis on youth. And I think a lot of what's happening with men now, we're seeing £600 million a year spent by men on grooming products in the UK. There will be extremes. There are guys who will go to extremes as regards surgery, and that the bulk of them are trying to look a little bit less rubbish, to be honest with you, as opposed to look out of this world as such. It is a case of money spent on hair care and moisturiser and that kind of thing. And the whole package of fitness, virility, looks and a healthy glow is, at the end of the day, for a bulk of men, it's probably tapping into that primeval instinct of being the alpha male. Yeah.
Jim McVeigh, in your career working with people in health and well-being, I'd like to talk specifically about young men, and particularly men in their formative years, in their teenage years. What effects and what dangers could there be of training hard and using supplements and sometimes even progressing to using anabolic steroids? What risks could they be having for the latter part of their life?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as you point out, it's very important to differentiate between people following a healthy, fit regime. For those people who are going down a route of supplements, there should be some alarm bells ringing. I mean, we've done studies where we've tested pro-hormones, perfectly legal to buy them over the counter, and they've come back as containing anabolic steroids. Anything that people are taking to boost those testosterone levels will have an impact on their own homeostasis, on how they actually deal with their body. I think there's some wider issues as well, in particular for young males. I mean, we're living in a society in the UK that is the least violent that in recorded history. It may not always feel that way, but in many cases it's highly sanitised, and this has got to be seen as a good thing. But there aren't the same opportunities for men to exert their masculinity, to show dominance. These things are very much more taboo than they've ever been, which is a sign of our civilised society. However, it does leave many men looking at opportunities to express themselves, to express their masculinity. And I think that's where some of it comes in. It's not about health, it's about that empowering. And there's nothing more empowering than being able to see your physique grow, to be able to get to see people's reaction amongst your peers, but also from outsiders. And I think those are the kind of issues that may be happening now.
I think Jim's made a really good point in that, in a way, it's a kind of a trait of masculinity. And from someone that's in the gym day in, day out, it's you wouldn't be surprised to hear the comparisons between the male weight room and the animal kingdom, because there does seem to be a lot of, chest beating, and there is a competitive edge. There is a kind of an undertone of testosterone that goes around. So I do think he makes a really good point in that regard.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia from London. I'm Simon Parker, and today our studio discussion is about men and their body image. In the studio, I'm joined by Rob Kemp, a journalist who writes for Men's Health magazine and other men's lifestyle publications. Jim McVeigh, who is the acting director at the Centre for Public Health at Liverpool John Moores University. And on the line, we're joined by Ben Carpenter. Ben is a fitness model and personal trainer. I'd like to think about the role of, we've spoken about magazines, but it almost seems that these days when you watch a film or you watch anything on television which involves a young male actor, that they all seem to have this very chiselled, lean, physical look. Am I right there, or is that a huge generalisation? What sort of portrayal is the media trying to make of young men?
Yeah, I agree. I think quite often we'll see a lot of the kind of the epic historical movies, your 300s and these kind of things, and the guys there are Men's Health covers models pretty much, and then the other extreme, you kind of stagnite kind of films, and the guys are slobs, and it's quite clearly defined as to who's successful and who's great and who's powerful and who's just bundling along. I think that's very much kind of the way they're portrayed these days. Yeah, I can see.
Ben, do you find that there's almost a star complex which goes on with these people we see on screen with six-packs, and we see on the covers of Men's Health and Wellbeing magazines, almost like the David Beckham of a previous era. It's an attainable physique to have. It's an aspirational way to be.
Yeah, I agree completely. There's usually when a big film comes out, there's always the conversation of who's going to be playing the next role. For example, if there's like Chris Hemsworth or The Rock, or who's going to be playing the main role in lead films like this. So I do think that the figurehead of big films has now become more and more in terms of expectation, that if someone's playing the hero in a film, especially if it's something like the Batman film or something, when there's one person in particular, there is always a lot of conversation regarding who's going to be playing that role. And then there's also a lot of conversation after that with regards to that person's workout. For example, if you looked on the internet for The Rock's workout or the 300 workout, it does become that kind of, I think there's a certain point at where the lead person in the film is idolised slightly. I
think on that theme, it gives us quite an interesting segue into talking about the very heavily branded nature of this industry and this male fitness industry. I was in a men's supplement store the other day in central London, and it was really quite overwhelming seeing the products which are now on sale. And for the consumer, I can only imagine that it's quite impossible to really know what you should be taking, if anything at all. Isn't there a case to say that actually we don't need supplements at all? Is that a valid case, Ben?
I agree completely. I actually work for a supplement company, but expectations of supplements and what supplements really do is often very, very warped. I get a lot of people who will email me or ask me, for example, what fat burner should I take, as if that is going to create the fat burning effect on its own. In a lot of instances, they are at best going to make relatively minor improvements alongside a good training and diet regime. But as with anything, when marketing and advertising gets involved, the expectation of what it can actually achieve compared to what it's supposed to achieve is very, very different. So I'll get a lot of questions from people asking what they should take, as if that's going to create a massive, massive difference, when in reality that's just not going to be the case. Unless you're looking at something like Jim touched on earlier, which are pro-hormones, which are essentially legal equivalents of anabolic steroids, in which case they can have drastic effects on physique, but at the same cost of anabolic steroids in terms of health risks.
Jim, I think Ben brings up quite an interesting point there. Jim, you work at the Centre for Public Health at Liverpool John Moores University. Do people really understand, do men really understand what they're consuming? When a man goes to a high street shop to buy some supplements because they think it's right for their body, do most men really understand what they're consuming? What do people tell you?
Some people do. Some people do an awful lot of background work. I've spoken to bodybuilders who are biochemists, people who have a complete understanding, and then you've got other people who have no idea whatsoever. I think it's also important to remember, in particular, we can't escape from the power of the internet. A lot of people will buy products off the internet and they will have no idea what's coming through the post. I agree with the comment that these supplements and fat burners aren't going to work on their own in general. Those few ones that do can cause fatalities. Those ones that can really boost your core temperature, yes, you will lose weight, but there's a pretty good chance that it will cause you serious damage as well.
You're talking about thermogenics?
Yes, things like danotrethanol, which has been around for a long time, but only just re-emerged in the last decade.
Rob, in your work in the industry writing articles about this very topic, what do you make of what Jim's just said? Do you think that often there's an opportunity for people to tie in what they consider to be editorially correct, often with a supplement and a product? Do you see that happening?
I do. It's the regulation of the products and the availability of them, the fact that some serious harm can be done by certain types is a genuine concern. The flip side, I think, to an extent, and as you say, you can see it in the high streets and the stores all over the UK now, is that there's a surge of health conscious and nutrition consciousness among men that that there never was before. I think magazines like Men's Health have to look at themselves and say, we are leading that surge. We are leading the way. We are encouraging men to take more interest in their diet, in the fats that they consume, in how protein and carbohydrates, etc., work. Equally, it's the editorial responsibility of those titles as well to highlight where these things can go wrong, to the extent that the legislation and the regulation of these products is a very, very vague area. And I think that there's, across the health media, I think there's a responsibility for these things to be highlighted, definitely.
Something I'm interested about, I mean, we talk about supplements and we talk about people taking things to help aid their gains, their muscle gains and their body growth. Protein seems to be the buzzword of the last 10 years. Protein this, protein that. People trying to take an increased amount of protein into their bodies to aid themselves in building lean muscle. Are people in some situations, I've got friends and I've met people who take in a huge amount of protein. Are they actually risking health problems by taking such a huge amount of a dietary element into their bodies? Ben, what do you make of that?
The protein quantity needed per day is always an interesting topic, and it always comes up. The kind of scientific literature on it is mixed. If someone's training, their requirement for protein goes up. If someone's training and dieting, it's been recently shown that their protein requirement goes up again. However, I do get people who will contact me and they will say, if I take protein powder, I've genuinely had a question where someone said, if I take protein powder, how long before I get muscular? Now, I had to point out that them having protein powder isn't really any different to them drinking something like powdered milk or eating chicken. Physiologically, it's no different to them eating protein from another source. But when you see a protein powder, with a picture of someone on the front, someone such as a bodybuilder, and it has a fancy title like mass gain powder or something, there are people that buy it thinking that adding that into their diet will have some kind of uniquely powerful effect, that ingesting protein from, meat or eggs or fish or something, that it will be different, when in truth, protein powder could benefit people who are deficient in terms of their own diet, in terms of protein. But if someone's eating enough protein in their diet, the need for a protein powder just goes out of the window completely.
Jim McVeigh, just finally, you're the acting director at the Centre for Public Health at Liverpool John Moores University. Just finally, if we were to have this conversation in 10 or maybe 15 years' time, how do you think it would have changed? What does the outlook for this topic in this theme look like for the future?
I think there's developments all the time with new drugs emerging, ones that are much more targeted to be able to increase muscle mass. I think during that time frame we'll see increasing numbers of people using them, but probably using a whole range of other substances as well. People tend not to stop using the drugs they're using, they just add new ones on because they're the fear of losing the gains they've made.
This is Radio VR, the voice of Russia, coming to you live from London. Stay tuned.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's discussion, but I'd like to thank my guests. We've been joined by Rob Kemp, a journalist who writes for Men's Health and other men's lifestyle publications. Jim McVeigh also joined us in the studio. He's acting director at the Centre for Public Health at Liverpool John Moores University. And on the line, we were joined by Ben Carpenter. Ben is a fitness model and personal trainer. From me, Simon Parker, goodbye.